Thank you, Kate, and welcome to Inside Politics. I'm John King. Thank you for sharing this busy news day with us. A key impeachment witness being questioned on Capitol Hill this hour. Kurt Volker resigned as special envoy to Ukraine just last week. He knows details of Rudy Giuliani's overseas search for 2020 election dirt. Plus, the president's anger is raw and very public. In contrast, the vice president's team is working frantically, but behind the scenes, to try to shield him from any Ukraine backlash. And if you think maybe, just maybe, the president would now have second thoughts about asking for foreign election help, well, think again.
I would think that if they were honest about it, they'd start a major investigation into the Bidens. It's a very simple answer. Likewise, China should start an investigation into the Bidens, because what happened in China is just about as bad as what happened with Ukraine. So I would say that President Zelensky, if it were me, I would recommend that they start an investigation into the Bidens.
A packed hour ahead for us, but we start right there with that remarkable moment. President Trump on his way to Florida telling reporters standing outside of the White House that Ukraine and China should launch investigations into the Bidens. This at the very same moment House Intelligence Committee members are questioning a potential impeachment witness about that exact same topic, using presidential power and the levers of official foreign policy to pressure Ukraine to dig up 2020 election dirt. President Trump again in that session outside the White House launching reckless, unfounded smears against Joe Biden and his son. Again, what the president is saying isn't true, but the former vice president feels compelled to fire back.
Now, let me make something clear to Mr. Trump and his hatchet men and the special interests funding his attacks against me. I'm not going anywhere. You're not going to destroy me, and you're not going to destroy my family. I don't care how much money you spend, Mr. President, or how dirty the attacks get.
There are a lot of moving parts going on today, some on the substance, some in the political debate. House Intelligence Committee Chairman Adam Schiff getting some blowback today after a New York Times account saying Schiff got an early account of the whistleblower's claims. Schiff's office telling CNN the whistleblower contacted the committee for guidance on how to report his complaint. Committee staff advised the whistleblower on the proper procedures, but Schiff's office denies the committee saw in advance the complaint against the president. President Trump's now saying, of course, he thinks Schiff helped write that whistleblower complaint. There's no evidence of that, of course, whatsoever, but that Schiff didn't proactively disclose the contact has some of his fellow Democrats frustrated. CNN's Mano Raju and Caitlin Collins join us live to start the program. First to you, Caitlin. That was remarkable. The President of the United States, standing outside of the White House asking two big foreign governments for help.
And, John, it came as the president is literally facing an impeachment inquiry over what he said to the Ukrainian president about investigating the Bidens. That's something we learned about from a whistleblower's complaint, a transcript released by the White House. We didn't need any of that today when the president on the South Lawn of the White House said in front of reporters, surrounded by microphones and in front of the cameras, that he believes China should launch an investigation into the Bidens. Just pretty openly, exactly what we had been trying to report out, what if he had similarly pressured other world leaders to open investigations into them, and the president made clear he thinks that's something that should happen. Now, the president said he had not spoken with President Xi of China about this, but he said it's clear that's something that they should begin talking about, essentially leaving open the possibility that that's something they could start doing in the future. Now, though, it's going to be pretty interesting to see how Republicans respond to this. Of course, it's coming after the president congratulated China on their communist anniversary the other day. And of course, as the president himself noted, the Chinese delegation is coming to the United States next week for another round of those trade talks. As we've been locked in this trade battle, you've seen this playing out between the United States and China. Whether or not it comes up then is going to be another question, but it's certainly going to be something on everyone's mind.
It's fascinating, and as you said, it'll be interesting to see if any senior Republicans say anything critical about the President of the United States standing on the grounds of the White House asking foreign governments for election dirt. Lessons not learned. Caitlin Collins live at the White House. Appreciate that. Let's get up to the Hill now and CNN's Mano Raju. Mano, today the House Intelligence Committee is speaking behind closed doors to the first big witness, the former U.S. Special Envoy to Ukraine, Kurt Volker. What do they hope to learn?
Well, they want to know exactly what happened as Rudy Giuliani in particular came to the Ukraine to try to talk to Ukrainian officials, and Giuliani himself has released text messages showing that they were in communication as Volker was trying to set up a meeting with an emissary of the Ukrainian government. Now, the whistleblower complaint had named Volker as an individual who has tried to alleviate concerns from the Ukrainian government about the conflicting messages that were coming out from the Trump administration, as well as from the president and his personal attorney about what exactly the Ukrainian government, the U.S. wanted from the Ukrainian government, namely that investigation into the Biden. So there are going to be a lot of questions about exactly what had transpired in the aftermath of the president's phone call with Ukrainian President Zelensky. Also, documents have been turned over to Capitol Hill about those communications, and we expect the members and the staff members to go through those documents individually. Now, members who have left this closed-door briefing, which is being led by the House Intelligence Committee staff, the Democratic members who have left have not commented, but we have gotten the first comment out of this briefing from a Republican member who sits on the House Intelligence Committee, that is Mike Turner. Now, Turner calls this a, quote, show trial. He is criticizing the way this transpired, and also he is suggesting that so far this testimony has done, in his view, nothing to advance Chairman Adam Schiff's, quote, impeachment agenda. So the Republicans believe that so far Volker has not done anything to add to the evidence against this president. We'll see how the Democrats ultimately respond. But, John, this is just the beginning. We expect to be a full day of questioning behind closed doors. We'll see what they ultimately learn. John?
Awesome. It'll be interesting to see if we get to see at least parts of this deposition as it plays out. Manu Raju, appreciate it. Live reporting, big day on Capitol Hill. With me in studio to share their reporting and their insights, Julie Hirschfeld Davis of the New York Times, Michael Scheer, also of the New York Times, Politico's Laura Barron Lopez, and Julie Pace of the Associated Press. Somebody help me. In the sense that I get what he's doing. If it's everyday behavior, how can you impeach him for it? Right? So he's just going to stand there and ask, we'll go around the world, and by the time we're done, he will have asked 170, 180 countries for help, and then he'll say, oh, well, what's the big deal, right?
He's essentially trying to normalize this and say it out loud, making the assumption that if you do that, if you're not hiding it behind closed doors in private conversations, that there's nothing wrong with it. But I think he's wrong on that front. I think just the fact of saying it on camera doesn't make it right, and it certainly bolsters the idea that his actual intention in the private phone call with Ukraine was not just, oh, here's an example of corruption with the Bidens, again, unproven example, but it was actually a direct request to a foreign government to help him in his re-election bid.
And the Biden campaign jumping right into this. This is Kate Bedingfield, the deputy campaign manager. As Joe Biden forcefully said last night, the defining characteristic of Donald Trump's presidency is the ongoing abuse of power. What Donald Trump just said on the South Lawn of the White House was the election equivalent of his infamous Russia, if you're listening, moment from 2016. The Democrats are trying to build an impeachment case on abuse of power, on letting Rudy Giuliani use the State Department, use taxpayer resources, official government access and influence to people to gather personal political information. And you have the president, again, I get the politics of it, he's trying to say, what's wrong? I'll keep doing it.
But by him repeatedly doing this and repeatedly saying it out loud, it emboldens House Democrats and it emboldens their inquiry, and it also adds potentially further another check mark on, oh, this is an abuse of power. Him saying this on the lawn and saying out loud exactly what was in the transcript and exactly what they're pursuing in their inquiry right now.
Well, and
I'll come back to this in a second. I just want to get this point in. It also makes it harder for Republicans to defend.
I was just about to say, it also makes it much harder for Republicans, because to the extent that you could point to what's in the whistleblower complaint and say, well, we don't really know all the conversations, we don't know what the full extent of that July conversation was, even though we've seen a partial transcript. How can we know what the actual tenor of those back and forths were? They can sort of cast aspersions or cast some doubt on what Democrats are trying to point to that's objectionable in those conversations. But when the president says the very same thing out loud, they're going to be faced with the question of, well, is that okay with you, that the United States, that the president is in front of the White House asking for the Ukraine, asking for China to go ahead and investigate Joe Biden? Is that something that you think the United States president should be doing? And to the degree that they don't have a good answer for that, it's going to make it very much harder for them to be, vigorous defenders of him as this goes forward.
I agree with all of that, but I also think it's not a hypothetical strategy that he's never played out before to try to kind of, as you said, normalize this. It worked with the Mueller investigation in a lot of ways. He spoke so many words about it. He literally made it such an everyday occurrence that that by the end of it, people were kind of
numb to
fatigued
it
and
a
numb,
bit. Right.
and it was normal, and everybody sort of said,
He exhausts you. He exhausts you.
And it's not impossible to imagine that the same thing could happen here, where a week from now, 2 weeks from now, a month from now, 2 months from now, we're all just sick and tired of Ukraine.
I do think this one, though, has the potential to be different because it does all circle one very specific question, which is it right for the President of the United States to be asking a foreign government to investigate a political rival? Like, that is one simple question that is now on the table, and he vocalized his desire to do that on camera.
Is it right, or how wrong is the way I would put it, because it's wrong. Because it's wrong. Is it an impeachable offense?
Right.
Is it just, this term gets way overused, Trump being Trump. He's been president for 3 years now. Done with that. It used to be he wasn't a politician, hadn't held office. You sort of excuse some things. It's how wrong is it, I think, is the question here. And part of the Democrats' challenge now is to build a case, to try to build a corruption, abuse of power, using the levers of government to advance your personal political gains. That's the case they're trying to make. Kurt Volker is behind closed doors. You heard Manu with the initial reporting, and we don't know. People are going to come out, and no offense to Congressman Turner, we'll see what happens in the end. People are going to come out, and they're going to give their take on it as we go forward. But he resigned just last week. That is why this is interesting. He resigned suddenly last week after conversations about whether or not he should cooperate. He's mentioned in the whistleblower complaint. He connected Giuliani with top officials. We know that. Giuliani has released the text. Kurt Volker does not dispute that. He's brought his own documents up to Capitol Hill with him. I view this as the first big witness as a central witness, because this is not an angry Democrat. This is a man who has worked for more than 2 decades in Republican politics. Senators know him. He worked for Senator McCain, was an ambassador, has a Republican pedigree. If he brings evidence to the table that they were wrongly using the instrument of power, government taxpayer resources, that's a credible witness.
Yes, and what Democrats want to hear from him is to what extent was he involved with Rudy Giuliani, because Giuliani has played up Volker's involvement in this incident, and also potentially to what extent did Giuliani try to recruit other government officials to also engage in this with Ukraine and ask Ukraine for these favors. So that's what they're going to be asking Volker, all those details, what Giuliani was doing. There's also some speculation about, as you mentioned, the timing of his resignation and whether or not that was done so that way he could cooperate with the committees.
And yesterday we were all focused on what would the State Department Inspector General bring to Capitol Hill, and the reviews of that were kind of confusing. Democrats were somewhat disappointed. Here's just a pilot. This is a statement from the 3 committee chairmen involved in this. The documents provided by the Inspector General included a package of disinformation, debunked conspiracy theories, and baseless allegations in an envelope marked White House, containing folders labeled Trump Hotel. These documents also reinforced concern that the president and his allies sought to use the machinery of the State Department to further the president's personal political interests. So they didn't get a document that says, aha, but they did get evidence that Rudy Giuliani, who peddles lies and conspiracy theories all the time, got this into the official government machinery. Is that enough?
Well, I mean, it's clear that this makes it very clear that he got it into the bloodstream at the State Department somehow. We don't know how seriously they took this document. They had it sitting there in somebody's office in the file cabinet, and it's an open question, I think, still, whether they were actively engaging in trying to corroborate it or pursue other threads of the investigation. There's a timeline in there, there's interview notes, and some of them are conspiracy theories, but some of it is actual information that the New York Times has reported, actual meetings that took place between Ukrainian officials and Giuliani and some cases and others to try to build this case that most of which has been debunked up till now. What I think it shows is the degree to which Giuliani was kind of freelancing this, but also, had a conduit to make this part of the United States government activities, whether that meant that they were going to follow up and investigate, or that it was just sitting around ready for someone to pick up if there were a reason to do so. What the committee really wants to know what the committees want to know from Volker, in addition to all of the other issues, is what did he know about this effort to hold back the military and security aid, and whether that was at all connected to these other issues that Giuliani was trying to inject into the bloodstream.
Was there an explicit quid pro quo, not just the call? There were meetings for months and months and months, and that's it, trying to piece it together. We shall see. It's going to take a while. Up next, some Republicans say they're getting more and more nervous watching the president react to this impeachment inquiry. More and more worried as the inquiry gains steam. Again today, the president asked Ukraine and China to investigate a domestic political opponent. That is indefensible, and yet the president is clamoring for more and more Republicans to go out and defend him. But a growing number of Republicans are instead voicing private concerns, including complaining they cannot obviously repeat what the president says and are otherwise not getting good guidance from the White House. One congressional Republican source complaining to CNN that relying on the president's re-election campaign alone to shape the counter-narrative will not be enough. There is no White House war room, this source saying. Why are we the ones who have to defend him? It is interesting in the sense that, again, you have the Republican president heading into a re-election year. Their fates are tied to him in the House, in the Senate, even governor's races, anything else across the country. Their fates are largely tied to him. And where are they? You have his most reliable allies out there, but even they are more attacking the Democrats or saying the Democrats are overreaching than trying to defend the substance.
It's a really hard position for Republicans because they don't know the full body of evidence right now. So they have to make this choice between how forcefully they want to defend him, knowing that those words could come back to haunt them if there's much more that comes out here. And then they're simply just not getting guidance from the White House on their strategy. And it does leave them. I mean, they've been in this place before. This is sort of the typical dynamic where the Republicans look to the White House and say, what's the playbook? What's the plan here? They don't get much guidance. In this case, I think the difference is they're more likely to stand back right now and say, take a more of a wait and see approach.
Today's guidance was, we're going to shift the focus from Ukraine and ask China to interfere. I say that with a bit of snark, but if you're a Republican, and even if you're a Republican who wants to go out and defend the president, you have this issue. So one of the things Nancy Pelosi has said to her members is, be careful, be serious, don't give them an opening. There are a lot of Republicans who think the chairman of the Intelligence Committee did give them an opening. There's a story in your newspaper today that the whistleblower called, and the way Adam Schiff describes it and the way the whistleblower's lawyers describes it is this person was going to file a complaint, and that takes a lot of guts, and was looking for help. How do I do this? What's the form? What's the process? And went to Schiff. Maybe that's the way it all played out, but Schiff did not proactively say that. He did not come out and publicly say that. So it's printed in the newspaper. The president says, aha.
I think it's a scandal that he knew before. I go a step further. I think he probably helped write it. Okay? That's what the word is. And I think I give a lot of respect for the New York Times for putting it out.
This is the challenge for Democrats in this environment. That's innuendo. It's wrong. There's no evidence. Schiff helped write it. That's what the word is. People are saying. We've lived this for the last several years of our lives. But this is why Democrats have to be extraordinarily careful. That's an opening.
Absolutely. It's an opening. And I mean, the story itself, I mean, I think it goes without saying, but I'll just say it anyway, that there is no evidence that Adam Schiff or his staff helped this whistleblower file the complaint. What was going on behind the scenes, we understand from my colleagues' reporting, was that the whistleblower was afraid that this was not being taken seriously and wanted to make sure that his concerns got seen and addressed, and so went to get guidance where he thought he could get it. The whistleblower procedures are pretty clearly laid out, and it's very important in those situations to follow the law. And it could be that Adam Schiff was worried that if he did voice this or proactively come out and say, hey, I know about this, that he would be somehow circumventing that process. We do know now, and looking back, it seems a lot less mysterious why he was raising this letter that he got from the intelligence community IG saying this complaint is out here, we're not sharing it with you because we've gotten guidance that we can't. He was clearly trying to focus more attention there and didn't come out and say I have this, but they do have to really be careful with how they talk about it.
Politics 101. If you have something that, especially in the age of Trump, that they can twist and use against you, you have to proactively get out ahead of it. Another conversation among Republicans is what about the vice president, who we know, the whistleblower complaint says the president told the vice president not to go to the Zelensky inaugural, pull him back as kind of a message to Ukraine. Then they did have later meetings. The vice president's staff, as we all know from reporting, did a bit of a tizzy, trying to protect him. That's their job. We're trying to get information. What's going on? Is the vice president exposed here? In the Washington Post today, this is what gets interesting when you try to get into Pence land. Officials said Pence and his staff weren't aware that the call had provoked alarm inside the White House, even though his national security advisor, Lieutenant General Keith Kellogg, had been monitoring it. It's also not clear whether Pence failed to read the White House account of the call in the briefing book or read it and found it unremarkable. The challenge for the Pence people is he likes to say he's always in the loop. He's an important advisor to the president. He did go meet with Zelensky, and the transcript, the rough transcript of that call was in his briefing book. If you read it, it is hard to not be alarmed by it, and yet they say his national security advisor, not alarmed, vice president, either not alarmed or not in the loop.
Yeah, and look, this is emblematic also of the landmines that keep popping up for the administration and the different administration figures as this goes along. You know, you try one story and then something else comes out and that story doesn't work so well anymore. And, it is even just with the publicly available information, it's hard to imagine that the vice president wouldn't be aware of what was going on, given the fact that Rudy Giuliani was on television on this network and everywhere else talking about what they were trying to do in the first place. And as you say, the vice president doesn't go to a meeting with a foreign leader without being fully briefed on what's happened, certainly by the president in the previous days and weeks. And so they are scrambling in Pence's office to figure out a narrative that avoids all these landmines and still makes him at the end.
The other piece of this
okay.
where they're really scrambling is in the whistleblower complaint. There's a footnote that says that Trump ordered Pence to not go on the trip. Sources told us that is true. The Pence people now say it's logistics, and it's kind of difficult to imagine if the president did ask the vice president to not go on this trip that he wouldn't say, why? Why don't you want me to go on this trip? And they're scrambling, trying to logistics. They couldn't set a date for it in time. Secret Service wasn't ready for it. It's taken them a week to come down on that with that explanation.
A week, yeah. I just should note, we tell you, Kurt Volker's up on Capitol Hill testifying. Jim Jordan, a Republican, a ranking Republican on one of the committees involved, came out and said he's impressed by the testimony so far. Again, we're just getting bits and pieces, reactions as they come out, but we want to bring them to you. We'll keep up on that. Up next for us, are there frustrations in the Democratic Party? Democrats are having some impeachment strategy jitters, too. Speaker Nancy Pelosi defending the Democrat we discussed just a few moments ago, the House Intelligence Chairman, Adam Schiff. But there are frustrations among some Democrats who warn the party has to be near perfect to not play into the president's hand. Most of this is aired in private, just like the Republican jitters we just discussed. The one Democrat who just signed on to the impeachment inquiry today making clear his issues with fellow Democrats he says are not handling this with the calm and the gravity it deserves.
But what's most important here is that we do not jump either to any conclusions. This is a sad, sad day for America. No one should cheer this. No one should applaud it. There were Democrats that signed on to impeachment before they were even sworn in. That's absolutely wrong. We can't sell impeach the mofo t-shirts any longer. We can't bring chicken to hearings. This has got to be a solemn and serious process.
Now, impeachment is a political process. It is a political judgment the House Democrats are going to make. There you have a congressman from a tough district in Staten Island who is worried about his own prospects back home. But he has signed on. This is what he's talking about. Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib from Detroit, from a safer Democratic district, is selling online T-shirts that say impeach the... You can figure that part out yourself. We're not going to say that on Family Friend. And another Democrat, Steve Cohen, did show up at a May hearing to mock the Attorney General Bill Barr eating chicken. And if you, again, number one, this should be taken seriously by everybody anyway. Number two, because it is a political debate heading into the re-election year, you see Max Rose there, and he says, if I'm going to do this, I need you liberals to protect me and not mess this up.
And Rose is in Trump plus 10 district, right. I believe. So he's in really the fringes of the Democratic majority, which is that he is in a really difficult seat. Republicans are going to go after him aggressively. And so, yes, there are a number of Democrats like him who are the reason Democrats won the majority that are insanely hesitant to go for impeachment and now are starting to feel as though that they have to, as though that now that they've seen polling that also has started to back it up is making them feel a bit more comfortable going there.
Right, and what they don't want is for their constituents or for the president and his team to be able to say this is all a joke to the Democrats. This is just to make money or to raise money or whatever. The speaker's trying to contain this. The question is, we've watched Republican speakers when they were in the majority have the same issues on different issues. But on a conference call with Democrats last night, she told, as we go forward on this, let's bring as much dignity, as much solemnity, as much prayerfulness that is worthy of the Constitution, and save some of our whatever we feel about Trump for the election. She's trying to separate the two. It's a very hard thing.
She wants to make
ask.
this about the Constitution and not about Trump. It's impossible to separate them because ultimately this is a process aimed at impeaching Trump. And they do need to be near perfect, though, to try to pull this off, in part because Trump is just so good. I mean, the Schiff example we were talking about in the last segment is just a perfect example. He is so good at sort of picking one thing from one member and painting the entire party with that. And Pelosi knows that. He's successfully done that for months.
The tools at his disposal, I mean, if you think back, the Clinton administration during the impeachment process, also fought back vigorously. But the tools at President Trump's disposal, with social media and the skills that he has at amplifying, and we've all seen it, how much he amplifies one little thing. That means, as Julie said, that they need to be perfect.
And we're getting to see, I just want to show you two examples here. The Democratic base is angry. The Democratic base is motivated for a number of reasons against this president. So the Democratic candidates for president see this at their events and have to deal.
No. We need to be able to successfully prosecute the case against 4 more years of Donald Trump, and it's going to take a prosecutor to do it. There's a theme to this event.
Dude's got to go at the Harris event there. She's making the prosecutor case. But the Warren thing was very interesting. The chance for lock him up, which of course is reminiscent of lock her up. And Senator Warren saying no. And she said after, this is too serious, that she does not want to encourage that kind of behavior, that kind of boisterousness at her rallies.
Right. I mean, it's a hard balance to strike also because not just the president is making this about, one thing and one person in a lot of cases, but the Democratic base, there is so much pent up urgency and eagerness to see Donald Trump go among the progressive left that now that this inquiry is actually on track, they spent so much time complaining that it wasn't and that the Democrats in Congress weren't opening a real impeachment inquiry, but that now that they are, there are a lot of people who say, we just want impeachment now. Like, forget all of this hearings and investigation. Like, let's just go. We have this transcript. We've heard what he said in public. A lot of Democrats, I think, feel that way, and Nancy Pelosi has to factor that in as well and understand, which she does, but maybe not all the members of her caucus do, that if they don't have an ironclad set of articles of impeachment, they're not even going to be able to get to that, much less get to removal if they even get that far.
All right, we'll continue the conversation as we move on. But coming up next, there's no place like home, unless at the moment you're Senator Kamala Harris. Topping our political radar today, some breaking news from the Senator Bernie Sanders campaign. Sanders campaign now confirming to CNN he will indeed participate in the next debate right here on CNN. That debate is in less than 2 weeks, October 15th. This news coming to us, of course, as Senator Sanders' campaign just yesterday announced it was indefinitely canceling all of his events because he was being treated, had a stent put in an artery because of a blockage. So we'll continue to watch that, but it sounds like Senator Sanders is doing better. Trouble for Kamala Harris back home in California. A new poll of likely Democratic voters released today has Senator Harris tumbling from frontrunner to 4th place back home in California, now well behind Elizabeth Warren, Joe Biden, and Senator Sanders. Bringing it to the room, that was a question. The Sanders campaign, they announced that he had a stent inserted, that they didn't give us a lot of details about the medical condition, but they indefinitely canceled events. Now at least we know the plan is to be back on the debate stage, which is a signal and a message to his supporters that they were waiting to hear.
Yeah, because they hadn't given any time frame. They had said canceled events, and we didn't know when he would be back on the trail. I mean, this does come at a difficult time for Sanders because on the one hand, he is highlighting his fundraising prowess, his continued fundraising prowess, but his standing in the polls has started to dip, and there's a real feeling in some of these early states that he just doesn't have the same momentum, that his supporters are looking elsewhere. Certainly his age has been a question, the same way it's been a question for Joe Biden. And a narrative is a powerful thing in politics. And so when you already have questions about age and you have a health scare like this, those questions are only going to deepen.
And with news of his hospitalization, the campaign also canceled the big ad buy that they had set to start in Iowa. And then that raised some alarms, and the campaign had to very quickly say, no, it's just a postponement. So we expect those to go up soon, I think, as well. I
expect to hear more as well, but Senator Sanders plans to be at the debate. That's good news. When we come back, Joe.
Trump knows there are no truth in the charges against me. None. Zero. Every independent news organization that has reviewed the charges at length has found it to be a flat-out lie, his assertions. Every single one of them.
Former Vice President is right. Almost everything President Trump says about Joe Biden and his son is untrue. But as you see there, Biden sees no choice but to push back. We have seen this before. Remember the 2016 Republican primaries, and even more so in the Trump versus Hillary Clinton 2016 general election. The president over and over and over again repeats conspiracy theories or mistruths in an effort to smear his rivals and to knock them off their game. And guess what? It's reckless, but it works. I say that. Here's a new poll out from Monmouth. Do you think Joe Biden put pressure on Ukrainian officials to get them not to investigate his son's business dealings, as Trump claims? 43% of Americans say he probably did. This is a documented falsehood. The sequencing of when Hunter Biden joined the board, of when the investigation was happening, it's not true. But 43% of Americans think probably did. I wonder why.
I mean, this is people do not understand the complexities of this, and it is a very complex situation, and they don't know when something like that has been debunked, which it has. And that's why this is sort of asymmetric warfare. When President Trump goes out and is willing to say these things that have been proven false, that we've all reported are not true, that don't hold any water. But if you're Joe Biden, you're not going to go out and say things that are not true about President Trump, because then you're going to be accused of being a liar.
So
right?
what's the sweet spot? What's the sweet spot for Biden pushing back without this snowballing and actually hurting him?
I don't know if he has found it or if any Democrat has figured out the sweet spot in these kind of situations. We saw the Clinton campaign struggle with that. I mean, this is not something that is unexpected, both for Joe Biden specifically, because Trump has been pushing this and Giuliani has been pushing this, but for Democrats in general, that something like this would happen where Trump would find a falsehood to try to promulgate here. It's how you combat it, because, you know, to Julie's point, they're not going to do the equivalent in throwing a lie at him, but there's a huge risk. What's Joe Biden going to do? Give an hour-long speech, point by point, debunking what his son did? That only gives more oxygen to it as well.
And I think a big piece of this, which Democrats are still figuring out, is the social media aspect. So Republicans are increasingly, and there have been evidence of other Republican firms putting out disinformation, so putting out these falsehoods across Facebook, across Twitter, across all these platforms, and that really does permeate the American electorate, and it's something that Democrats don't know how to respond to quite yet, and they almost have to build it in-house. So whether or not Biden's campaign is figuring out ways to really push back on this permeation as they head towards the general.
We'll watch it as it plays out. Up next for us, the book the president slams